All right, Christians, it is time for another quick Bible study. And today it comes from our reading in Matthew 10 through 13. And the question of the day is, were the 12 disciples superheroes? I think Jesus Christ made them superheroes. Let's read. So God has such an uncanny way of saying the most amazing things and then simply drops into a list of names. So check this out. Matthew 10:1. And when he had called unto him his 12 disciples, so this is Jesus talking, he gave them power against unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal all manner of sickness and all manner of disease. Wow. And then watch next verse, verse 2. Now the names of the 12 apostles were these, and it goes on to list the 12 apostles, which we're going to look at in just a second. But this is just like the Bible. Here's another example. Moses wrote this in Genesis 1 verse 16. And so, if you've never read Genesis, the first chapter is the start of the creation of everything, right? And so it's talking about how God made the moon and the sun, and then it goes, he made the stars also. Almost like an afterthought, like, oh yeah, he made the stars also. There's like a billion stars, right? We can't even number them. And he's like, oh yeah, he did that. And then it just goes on, like no big deal. And I'll tell you what, I read that years ago and it stuck out to me years ago. And every time I walk out at night and I look up, and see the stars if it's clear, and it's like, I think of this. Oh yeah, just kind of an afterthought. I made the stars also. This is our God. This is our amazing God. So let's look at the 12 apostles. I don't know if you've ever walked around. There was a post the other day a friend of mine shared, and it was talking about walking around in a cemetery. And some people think that's strange. I don't. I'm really comfortable with death. I'm comfortable with my own mortality, and I find cemeteries super interesting. It's interesting to see what the family of the dead put on tombstones and things like that. And hey, maybe the dead person kind of dictated what was put on there before their death. Who knows? But it's interesting to read these like kind of last testaments to somebody's life, right? Some of them are super detailed. I've seen grave markers that have no information on them whatsoever, and then everything in between, right? So let's read this list of 12 apostles. Simon, who is called Peter. So kind of like a nickname. And then the naming conventions during this time in the world were a little bit different, but nonetheless. And then Andrew, his brother. Hey, again, I've seen tombstones very much like this, where it's like the name of the person and then brother of or father of. And like that's the only thing, that's the last thing that was, kind of immortalized about this person. James, the son of Zebedee. I'd like to have a kid named Zebedee. John, his brother. Philip. And that's it, just Philip. Bartholomew, Thomas, Matthew the publican. Oh, the much maligned publican. James the son of Alphaeus. And then here's one you never really hear talked about too much, Lebbaeus, whose surname was Thaddeus. But either way, whoever really talks about Lebbaeus or Thaddeus? You never really hear, nobody's ever like, yep, I really identify with Lebbaeus, right? Nobody, people are always aligning with Matthew or Peter or John or, things like, doubting Thomas, all those kinds of things. But nobody's ever like, yeah, I really align with Thaddeus. And I guess it's because for whatever reason, God chose these men. It'd be interesting, maybe a few thousand years, that's kind of ridiculous to say, but into eternity, like whatever time frame into eternity, I'd kind of like to know who this Thaddeus guy was and what did he do? He was obviously important and had some kind of specific function. Otherwise, Jesus Christ wouldn't have picked him. But we really know very little. I don't know. Hey, if there's somebody out there that maybe is a student in other Jewish writings outside of the Bible where maybe this guy's talked about and something about that, I'd love to hear, like, what did Thaddeus do? All right. The last two, Simon the Canaanite. See how some of these men are identified by they're the son of or the brother of? And if I'm correct, and I am, Simon is the only one that was identified from where he was from. Isn't that interesting? All right, and then the last one, he's famous because he took 30 pieces of silver, which was probably a substantial amount of money at that time. But he took that from the religious leadership to betray the Lord Jesus Christ. And then he ended up basically falling headlong into a field and kind of blew up, essentially. So this is Judas Iscariot, the famous Judas Iscariot. Judas. You know, I think Judas is easy to hate because we all have a little bit of Judas in us, right? Depending on where we're at in our walk with Christ and our relationship and our personality. Hey, I spent a lot of time I don't know that I've ever just directly, just outright denied the Lord. I probably have, right? But I'm just saying, I don't know that, I don't think anybody's ever asked me like, hey, are you a Christian or do you believe in Jesus? And for whatever reason, I was like, no, that's not me. Okay. So I don't identify with Peter in that sense. Peter did that 3 times before the cock crew and all that. That's just not my issue. I've always been somewhat bold, but have I betrayed the Lord? Oh yeah. I spent 8 years just really running from the Lord, and I see that as a betrayal. And no, you don't need to tell me, don't be so hard on myself or forgive. I've done all. I'm good with all that now. It's probably my biggest regret in life. Like if I could go back and fix one thing, I would want to be more consistent with the Lord and not have these large gaps where I kind of ignored my relationship. That bothers me, but I'm over it, and I'm moving forward and I'm speaking boldly for Christ and the things of the Lord. So it's not holding me back. It's just, if you were to ask me if I had a regret in life, that would be it. Everything else, I don't really care about all. Okay, moving on. So how do we know for a fact that these 12 apostles were never meant to be apostles to the Gentiles? Let me ask that again. How do we know without doubt that these 12 apostles were never meant to be apostles to the Gentiles? How do we know that? Okay, well, here's the answer. It takes years of going to Bible college, reading all the top scholars on the subject. You have to study the Hebrew language and Jewish culture in general, and then only then will you understand why these 12 apostles were not to the Gentiles. Okay, I'm totally kidding. Totally being sarcastic. Look, it's super easy. All you have to do is read the next 3 verses. The Bible's amazing like that. Hey, it's not always this easy with everything, okay? But in this case, the Bible's crystal clear. So let's read Matthew 10:5. So right after the Lord listed the 12 apostles, he says this: these 12 Jesus sent forth and commanded them, saying, go not into the way of the Gentiles, and into any city of the Samaritans enter ye not. Well, if you don't know, why would Jesus care about the Samaritans? The reason why is because Samaritans were half Gentile and half Jew. And full-blooded Jews completely rejected the Samaritans. Couldn't even touch them. That's why when Jesus was speaking to the Samaritan woman, his disciples stood at a distance and were like marveling at the fact that he was sitting right next to this woman talking to her, because that just wasn't done. But that was literally Jesus Christ foreshadowing the fact that he was going to the Gentiles at some point. He knew, and all the writing was on the wall, that the Jews were not going to accept him as Messiah. But he waited. He waited until they had the Romans do their dirty work and crucify him. Let's carry on. Matthew 10:6. So just to clarify, in verse 5, go not to the Gentiles, don't even go to the Samaritans because they're half Gentile, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Hey, it doesn't get any clearer than that. Don't go to the Gentiles. Don't go to even half Gentiles, but go to the house of Israel. And then he says in verse 7, and as ye go, preach, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. What? Is that what we tell people today? If somebody came to you and they know you're a Christian and they said, hey, I don't want to die and go to hell. How do I get saved? Or whatever words they use. And you say, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Right? No way. No way. So let's summarize this. Go not into the way of the Gentiles. Into any city of the Samaritans enter ye not. Go to the house of Israel. Preach the kingdom of heaven. Wow. That's very different than what we do today. Very different. So, no Gentiles, not even half Gentiles. Go only to Israel, preach the kingdom of heaven. So, my question to you is, do you still think the book of Matthew is written to you? Or is it possible? Could you potentially concede or consider, just for a moment, that it was actually written to the Jews and the nation of Israel that were still under the dispensation of law? Is that a possibility? I hope you'll just kind of ease your preconceptions and the things that have been told to you over and over and over again. If you grew up in church or whatever, just give your mind a moment to consider, what do God's words actually say? Not what do I want them to say, what do I hope they say, or just an outright denial of the fact that they're saying these clear words. Let it rest for a minute in your mind. All right. So I say the book of Matthew is written for our learning in the dispensation of the grace of God. That's the dispensation we live in. And if I'm wrong, do me a favor and show me from the Bible. Show me from the Bible. It's not a challenge. It's just saying, hey, if you consider me a brother in the Lord and you think I'm wrong, let's have a Bible discussion about it. Okay, that's all I got. Thanks for being here. Please subscribe. If you get any encouragement out of this at all, let me know. It'll help me. It'll encourage me. And if you think it might help somebody that, is a friend or a family member, share it with them. Ask them what they think. I'm trying to get Christians to speak up. I'm not saying you have to agree with me, but we are all called to teach and to preach the truth to a lost and dying world. So join me. Join me in this adventure of being a child of God. All right, I'm out. Have a good Bible read.